In this week's episode, the stories are about Miis matching real people, Bad Bunny breaking the Grammy ceiling, the Olympics coverage getting more accessible, and more. Hi, I'm Bernadette Smith, keynote speaker and writer. Welcome to 5 Things, where I bring good vibes to DEI. There's plenty of bad news out there. This show is about the good stuff, real progress, real stories, and ideas to help you make your work and life more inclusive. Your proof of positive change. Hey folks, my name is Bernadette Smith. Pronouns are she and her. I'm CEO of Equality Institute. Welcome to 5 Things. Good vibes in DEI. This is your proof of positive change. The world is a shit show, so I like to focus on what's working and celebrate that and do more of that. I like to shine the light in the dark. All right, so in this week's 5 Things newsletter, I told a story about my former business as an LGBTQ wedding planner. So some of you might know that back in 2004, in Massachusetts, marriage equality came to the state, and I started a business right away as sort of an activist wedding planner to help these couples feel safer navigating a very traditional industry. So that was sort of my business. I wrote 3 books on the subject. I ended up doing a lot of speaking and training and created an online certification course and did a whole lot of work in that industry. And that's, how it all began for me. And one of my key messages in education and in speaking and training was don't assume. Just because there's always been one bride and one groom does not mean that is still the case. We cannot make assumptions about the gender of who's getting married. We can't make assumptions about whether there's going to be parents involved or gender roles or any of the traditions. Just don't assume. And that key message is something I still talk about to this day, is all of the mistaken assumptions that we make and how those can get really awkward. I tell stories about my own mistaken assumptions. But one of the stories that I don't talk about or haven't written about before is when I once got a call from a bride. She was talking to me a little bit about her wedding, asking me a couple of questions. And it was time to set up a time to meet in person. So I said something like, will that time work for her? Referring to this bride's partner, this bride's fiance. Will that time work for her? And the woman took a breath and she said, actually, my fiance is a man. So she was coming out to me as straight, essentially, because I had made an assumption about the gender of her partner. And so it was really awkward there for a second because she hadn't probably ever had to come out before, right? And for me, I had sort of put her in that box and it was really awkward. I sort of fell into the trap that I taught others to avoid. But I apologized. And I will never forget that story. It sort of singed on my brain and we moved on. It was fine. But for leaders, these kinds of ouch moments, they are kind of the price of admission. There are lots of opportunities for them, especially when you are in leadership roles. Yet so many of us are actually afraid of being canceled. They're afraid that our ouch moments will cause us to experience rejection or impact our careers. And so we often, myself included, I just found myself doing this the other night. We often will choose silence over intentional connection, over intentional inclusion. We stay cautious instead of curious. But I know this from firsthand experience. If we don't risk that awkwardness, we don't get the wisdom. Right. And I've been collecting a lot of wisdom over the years because I've made a lot of mistakes over the years. But what matters isn't being perfect. And if we recover gently and peacefully, it's fine. Where it's actually a way to build trust. We can recover from an ouch moment with kindness, commitment to doing better, and then moving on to reduce the awkwardness. When we do that, we can build trust. So the wisdom is there. We just have to lean into the discomfort. the discomfort of potentially risking a mistaken assumption. We got to try. So, have you ever found yourself in a moment of total embarrassment lately? I love talking about this stuff. All right, let's get into this week's good vibes. The first story this week comes from Nintendo. The latest update to Nintendo's video game, Tamagotchi Life Living the Dream, lets players create Miis as male, female, non-binary, or mixed identity options. And it gives dating options that include same gender, asexual, and aromantic. So previous versions totally excluded LGBTQ plus relationships. And that sends a signal that LGBTQ plus people don't belong. It sends a signal of who belongs and who doesn't. So the lesson here is to audit your forms, audit any sort of profile, anything that's customer or client facing or even internal employee facing. So people can describe themselves accurately. So update those settings to be more inclusive. All right, the next story this week comes from Bad Bunny, who became the first Latin artist to win Album of the Year in the Grammys. 68-year history. This Spanish language project took the top category, and it marks a huge shift in an industry which has long centered English language norms. And when Spanish speakers and so many others are under attack in the US, this is absolutely huge, and he used his platform to speak out against that. So I love all of this, and, ultimately at the end of the day, a win like this visibility can widen what executives view as marketable, and that can impact who gets greenlit, who gets funding next. The lesson here is to track firsts, then ask what structural changes make these firsts repeatable. The next story this week comes from Minnesota, where the Needle and Sky knitting shop developed a knitting pattern protesting ICE. This sold through international craft networks and generated $600,000. So $5 a pattern, $600,000. All of it went to immigrant support groups. The shop drew inspiration from the red hats worn during World War II as signs of resistance. So I love this. And I especially love that it's kind of a safer form of protest for folks who don't want to go or can't join in street actions. This is a really cool, fun way introvert can protest. And I love that, a knitting shop was kind of behind it all. So very, very cool. All right. The next story comes from wonderful people who are selling their Bob Ross paintings. So multiple Bob Ross paintings have sold, including 3 for about $1.27 million. The proceeds from these paintings is benefiting PBS, the public broadcasting service, public television here in the U.S., which just recently received major federal funding cuts. So PBS was really hemorrhaging money because of the federal government's cuts, and these owners of Bob Ross paintings sold the artwork to raise money for PBS. So it's so cool, and this is important because public media is free, right? And it provides access to this free educational programming, which can especially benefit rural communities, lower-income households. I love this story. All right. The next story comes from the Olympics, where at these Winter Olympics games on all platforms, NBC Universal implemented closed captioning for all broadcast events. They expanded their audio description services for people who are blind or have low vision. They have new high-quality stereo sound for descriptions, comprehensive support for screen readers and keyboard-only navigation. Their on-screen text will now be for both live events and full event replays. So all of these things address the systemic barriers that have historically excluded a quarter of the population, a quarter of adults with disability from full cultural participation. So when we build accessibility into the core production, when we sort of build it in from the ground up, It improves usability for everyone, including people who are at a noisy bar or, are trying to watch in a noisy environment otherwise. So this is a great benefit for everyone. All right, so this week's Good Vibes to Go is to watch or rewatch Schitt's Creek. Schitt's Creek, the Canadian TV show, beloved TV show starring the late, great Catherine O'Hara, who recently passed, is just utterly charming, utterly inclusive, and delightful, and a great, great respite from the bad vibes out there. So get some good vibes and laugh and laugh and laugh with some Schitt's Creek. Folks, if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Thank you for all you do to build an inclusive world. I am grateful for you. Have a great week. Thanks for listening to 5 Things, Good Vibes in DEI. If today's stories gave you hope or sparked an idea, share this episode with a colleague or a friend. And if you want to spread more good vibes, leave a quick rating or review. It helps others find their proof of positive change.